February 14th, 1943. The wintry Tunisian hills near Kasserine Pass. Lieutenant Hans Schaefer stood outside his disabled Panzer IV, watching German recovery crews examine a peculiar American weapon captured from fleeing troops hours earlier. The steel tube measured nearly 5 feet long, absurdly simple in construction. A wooden shoulder stock, crude wire sights, no precision engineering, no complex mechanisms, just a pipe. Schaefer had commanded tanks through Poland, France, and 2 years of Russian winter. He had faced Soviet anti-tank rifles that could barely scratch German armor, British 2-pounder guns that required multiple direct hits. Nothing in his experience suggested this primitive American tube could threaten a 43-ton tank protected by 80 millimeters of hardened steel. He was wrong. Within 18 months, that simple tube and thousands like it would systematically dismantle German armored doctrine. The weapon German tankers would come to fear more than Soviet artillery, more than American fighter bombers, more than anything except the rockets themselves. The weapon that would transform Europe's most confident tank crews into men who checked every doorway, scanned every window, and abandoned perfectly functional vehicles at the first distinctive whoosh of an incoming projectile. The bazooka represented something Germany's military theorists had never imagined. Not superior technology defeating inferior, but adequate technology, mass-produced, placed in the hands of every American infantryman who might face a tank. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The weapon Schaefer examined that February morning carried an official designation of a launcher rocket 2.36-inch anti-tank M1. American soldiers called it the Bazooka, after a novelty musical instrument played by comedian Bob Burns. The name mocked any pretension to sophistication. This was a working-class weapon, factory metal, salvaged parts, coat-hanger sights on early prototypes. German ordnance officers who examined captured specimens recognized immediately what they held. The Americans had operationalized shaped charge technology in a man-portable system requiring minimal training. The M6 rocket's pentalite explosive could penetrate 4 inches of armor plate. Not enough to guarantee kills against Tiger frontal armor, certainly, but more than sufficient against side plates, engine compartments, tracks, vision devices, turret rings. Every weak point German armor possessed. The engineering was crude but effective. The open tube vented rocket exhaust away from the operator. The shaped charge warhead focused explosive energy into a superheated jet capable of burning through steel like a cutting torch. 2 men could operate it. Any infantryman could learn basic procedures in hours. Most revolutionary was mathematics. One bazooka cost approximately $18 to manufacture. One Panzer IV cost roughly $35,000. The cost-effectiveness ratio approached 2,000 to 1. America could lose 100 bazookas per tank destroyed and still maintain overwhelming advantage. German intelligence officers recognized these implications immediately. Reports filed in early 1943 noted that American forces possessed portable anti-tank capability exceeding anything Allied infantry had previously deployed. The weapon represented not technological superiority, but industrial democracy applied to warfare. Not craftsmanship defeating mass production, but mass production overwhelming limited numbers of superior vehicles. The question German commanders faced was straightforward. How do you defend tanks designed for offensive breakthrough against weapons specifically designed to kill tanks in close combat? How do you maintain armored momentum when every American squad potentially carries tank-killing capability? They had no good answers. The bazooka's origins traced to 1942 Maryland. Captain Leslie Skinner and Lieutenant Edward Uhl had been tasked with creating a delivery system for the M10-shaped charge grenade. Too heavy to throw, too powerful to mount on rifle barrels without injuring operators, the grenade possessed tank-killing capability, but no practical application method. Uhl's solution came from a junk pile, a discarded steel tube, approximately the same diameter as the grenade. Within hours, he had fabricated a crude prototype, The first test across the Potomac River demonstrated surprising effectiveness. No violent recoil, no dangerous backblast, just smooth rocket launch and minimal exhaust. The May 1942 demonstration at Aberdeen Proving Ground showcased the weapon's potential. Where sophisticated spigot mortars failed to hit moving targets, Skinner and Uhl's improvised launcher achieved repeated hits using coat hanger sights bent into shape that morning. General Gladion Barnes immediately ordered 5,000 units into production. General Electric delivered the order with 89 minutes to spare before the deadline. 5,000 bazookas were manufactured in 30 days. American industrial capacity demonstrated what Germany's meticulous craftsmen could never match. Not superior individual weapons, but overwhelming numbers of adequate weapons delivered impossibly quickly. The weapon's combat debut proved disappointing. Operation Torch landings in November 1942 caught American forces unprepared. Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower discovered the night before invasion that troops had received no bazooka training. Soldiers first saw the weapons when crates were opened on transport ships crossing the Mediterranean. Early M6 rockets proved horrifically unreliable. Primers failed to ignite. Propellant charges burned inconsistently. Electrical firing systems corroded in. Salt air. During the Tunisia campaign, fighting through spring 1943, an American general visiting front lines after combat operations concluded could not find any soldiers who reported the weapon had actually stopped an enemy tank. Not one verified kill. But German intelligence officers saw past early failures. They recognized the weapon's potential if properly developed. Captured bazookas were shipped to Germany for analysis. Engineers at Hugo Schneider AG began immediate development of the German equivalent. The result was the Raketen Panzerbuchse 43, the Panzerschreck, tank terror. German engineers couldn't simply copy American design, they needed to improve it. The bazooka's 60mm warhead couldn't reliably penetrate heavier German armor, but that same limitation applied in reverse. German designers needed capability against Soviet heavy tanks and American Shermans. The solution was scaling up. 88mm caliber, matching existing German anti-tank rockets. This provided penetration capability approaching 160mm under ideal conditions, nearly double American bazooka performance. But the larger warhead created problems. Unlike American rockets, which burned their propellant completely within launch tubes, German rockets continued burning for approximately 2 meters after leaving the muzzle. This created enormous backblast that could seriously burn operators. Initial solution proved impractical. Troops were instructed to wear protective ponchos, heavy gloves, and gas masks without filters when firing. In combat, this cumbersome protective equipment made the weapon nearly unusable. Later models added blast shields, but this increased weight from 20 pounds to 24 pounds. The massive smoke signature earned nickname A Ofenrohr, stovepipe. Every firing revealed the shooter's position to every enemy within visual range. American bazooka teams could fire and relocate quickly. Panzerschreck. Teams burdened with protective equipment and heavier weapons were significantly less mobile. Production began in 1943. Approximately 300,000 Panzerschrecks would be manufactured during the war. Impressive numbers by German standards. Utterly inadequate compared to American production. By war's end, American factories would produce 476,000 bazookas of all models. General Electric alone manufactured 91.6% of total production. The industrial capacity differential that would ultimately doom Germany's war effort was already evident in anti-tank weapon production ratios. But the Panzerschreck's existence revealed an uncomfortable truth. Germany, which had revolutionized modern warfare through armored blitzkrieg, was now copying American infantry weapons. The nation whose tanks had terrorized Europe was reverse engineering American tubes designed to destroy those same tanks. The psychological implications were profound. Meanwhile, American ordnance engineers addressed early bazooka failures systematically. The M1A1 variant introduced improved rockets and better electrical systems. By July 1943, when Allied forces invaded Sicily, American troops carried significantly more reliable weapons. Sicily provided the bazooka's first major test against German heavy armor. The Hermann Göring Division and elements of Heavy Tank Battalion 504, with approximately 17 Tiger tanks total on the island, attacked American positions around Gela and Biazzo Ridge, confident in armored superiority. What followed shocked German crews. American paratroopers of the 82nd Airborne Division, scattered across 50 miles of Sicilian countryside after chaotic night drops, gathered into small groups, defending key positions. When German armor advanced on July 11, 1943, these isolated American soldiers possessed bazookas and training in how to use them. Colonel James Gavin later wrote that bazookas were most important since they were the only weapons troopers were carrying that would enable them to engage German armor on reasonable terms. Initial attempts to penetrate Tiger frontal armor failed predictably. Rockets struck with tremendous impact, then bounced off harmlessly. But seasoned non-commissioned officers kept their heads. They had been trained to target weak spots, side armor, rear engine compartments, tank tracks. As Tigers maneuvered to bring 88mm main guns to bear, American bazooka teams shifted position, seeking angle shots. Through the long, brutal day at Biazzo Ridge, the battle raged. Naval gunfire from destroyers with 155mm guns proved decisive, along with the arrival of Sherman tanks. But bazookas had demonstrated capability. The weapon could kill German armor when properly employed by trained soldiers against appropriate targets. For the broader Sicily campaign continuing through August 17, 1943, M1A1 bazookas were credited with destroying 4 medium German tanks and 1 Tiger I. The Tiger kill was described in military histories as achieved through an improbable hit, reportedly through the driver's vision slot, though specific details including exact date, location, unit designation, or soldier names have not been documented in available sources. Gavin's after-action report praised the bazooka's effectiveness when properly employed. The weapon had proven itself. News of Sicily's success spread rapidly through American forces. Soldiers who had been skeptical after North Africa began requesting bazookas for their units. But more significantly, German tank crews began reporting encounters with American rocket launchers. Intelligence reports from Sicily noted that American infantry possessed portable weapons capable of damaging or destroying tanks at close range. Tank commanders reported needing to maintain constant vigilance for infantry with tube launchers. The psychological shift had begun. By autumn 1943, further improvements entered service. The M9 model featured a two-piece design for easier transport, crucial for airborne operations. Assembled length was 61 inches, disassembled 31.5 inches. Weight was approximately 15.87 pounds unloaded. Most significantly, the new Magnavox T6 trigger magneto replaced the troublesome battery ignition system, eliminating countless malfunctions. The M6A3 rocket entered production with a blunt hemispherical nose preventing deflection off sloped armor. Circular fin assembly improved flight stability. More effective shaped charge standoff and improved propellant made it reliable across temperature ranges. This rocket could penetrate 3.5 to 4 inches of armor plate reliably at effective ranges of 250 to 300 yards. Soldiers who had cursed early unreliability now praised effectiveness. The weapon became particularly valuable in the Italian campaign where mountainous terrain favored defensive positions. German forces fortified villages on hillsides, using narrow valleys as killing zones. American infantry advancing through these valleys faced machine gun nests, mortar positions, and dug-in armor in prepared positions. Bazookas proved ideal for this environment. High-explosive anti-tank rounds destroyed machine gun positions and light vehicles. Versatility exceeded original design parameters. At Cassino in early 1944, where Allied forces battered themselves against German defences for months, bazookas were used more often against fortifications than against tanks. A rocket that could blow holes through 4 inches of steel plate could also demolish reinforced concrete emplacements. But the psychological impact on German tank crews was accelerating beyond tactical concerns. Interrogations of captured German soldiers through 1943 and early 1944 revealed consistent patterns. Tank crews spoke constantly about American rocket launchers. They described knowing that rockets could come from any position. Any soldier might carry tank-killing weapons. The mathematics of vulnerability had shifted fundamentally. Before bazookas, German tanks survived months or years in combat. Crew experience accumulated. Veterans developed intuition for battlefield dangers. But against bazooka-equipped American infantry, survival measured days or weeks. German tankers who had charged confidently through Poland and France now advanced hesitantly, constantly scanning for threats. Every building became a potential ambush position. Every hedgerow concealed potential death. Urban combat became suicide mission without massive infantry support. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring acknowledged the crisis in December 1943, reporting that American rocket launchers had imposed unacceptable losses requiring fundamental reconsideration of combined arms warfare. The weapon had given American infantry formidable confidence. Training manuals showed transformation starkly. The 1940 Wehrmacht Panzer Manual devoted one paragraph to infantry anti-tank weapons. The 1944 revision devoted the entire chapter to countering rocket launchers. French conquest tactics were obsolete. German responses proved futile. Maintaining distance from infantry was impractical in confined terrain. Infantry escorts slowed operations to walking pace, negating speed advantages. Avoiding towns paralyzed mobility. Every countermeasure degraded effectiveness. Germans began welding spare track links and sheet metal to tanks as improvised armor. These Schürzen were designed to detonate shaped charges prematurely. While sometimes effective, they made tanks heavier, slower, and mechanically unreliable. More significantly, they represented desperation. The nation whose engineering prowess had terrorized Europe was now welding scrap metal to tanks. As 1944 approached, with the Allied invasion of France imminent, German tank crews prepared knowing they faced not just enemy armor, but hundreds of thousands of infantry armed with rocket launchers. Every crossroads, village, hedgerow might conceal death. The bazooka's greatest test came June 6, 1944. D-Day. American forces storming Omaha Beach carried bazookas ashore in the first waves. Under intense German fire, with men dying by the hundreds in the surf and on sand, bazooka teams advanced toward German strongpoints. The weapons proved crucial for reducing fortified positions that had pinned down entire companies. Engineers used bazookas to blast paths through obstacles. Infantry used them to suppress machine gun bunkers long enough for flamethrower teams to close in. In weeks following D-Day, as Allied forces pushed through Norman bocage country, bazookas became essential for dealing with German armor ambushing from concealed positions. Thick hedgerows created a claustrophobic battlefield where combat occurred at ranges measured in yards, not hundreds of yards. In this environment, bazooka's portable firepower was life-saving. But German armor was evolving. Panther tanks' sloped frontal armor could deflect even improved M6, A3 rockets at anything but point-blank range. Tigers remained nearly impervious from the front. American soldiers learned to work in teams. Riflemen suppressed enemy infantry, while bazooka teams maneuvered for side shots. General George Patton, commanding Third Army, wrote that the purpose of bazooka was to be used as a last resort in keeping tanks from overrunning infantry, with range held to around 30 yards. 30 yards. Less than 100 feet. At that distance, tank machine guns could shred the bazooka team in seconds. The mortality rate among bazooka operators was sobering. Men assigned to anti-tank duty knew they were being asked to advance toward enemy armor that could kill them from hundreds of yards away. Yet volunteers never lacked. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. German prisoners revealed deep demoralization. Tank crews spoke constantly about bazookas being everywhere with no defense. These Wehrmacht elite, Poland and France's conquerors, were now frightened men understanding their mighty tanks were simply targets. One remarkable account involves Lieutenant Colonel Charles Carpenter. Born August 29, 1912 in rural Illinois, Carpenter grew up during the Great Depression. His family lost their farm. Educated on scholarships, he worked as a history teacher before the war. He enlisted in 1942, completed flight training, and arrived in France in 1944, assigned to 4th Armored Division as artillery spotter and reconnaissance pilot. Carpenter flew L-4 Grasshopper observation planes, which he nicknamed Rosie the Rocketeer. He mounted 6 M9 Bazookas, 3 launchers per side, on plywood boards fixed to outboard wing struts. Total weight when loaded was approximately 106 pounds. He wired them to the cockpit with an electrical firing system, installing a control panel with push-button switches allowing individual or salvo firing. Carpenter typically flew solo to maximize performance. His attack profile involved diving from altitude to approximately 100 meters above target, firing rockets, then pulling up steeply to escape return fire. The plunging fire attacked thinner top armor of tanks, which measured 40 to 45 millimeters on Tiger turret tops versus 100 millimeters or more of frontal armor. Carpenter is officially credited with destroying 6 tanks, including 2 Tiger ones. Witness accounts claim 14 tanks destroyed, but the official number stands at 6. His first major success came September 20th, 1944 at the Battle of Arrogance, where he was credited with destroying 1 German armored car and 4 tanks in a single day across 3 sorties, firing 16 rockets. He was featured in Stars and Stripes, Associated Press, Popular Science, and Liberty magazine. In Stars and Stripes, he was quoted saying, "Word must be getting around to watch out for cubs with bazookas on them. Every time I show up now, they shoot with everything they have. They never used to bother the cubs. Bazookas must be bothering them a bit." That understated assessment captured broader reality. German tankers were bothered. They were frightened. The weapon they had initially dismissed as primitive American improvisation had become nemesis. The transformation in German tactical doctrine through 1944 revealed how completely the bazooka had altered armored warfare calculations. Documents captured after the war showed systematic changes in tank deployment procedures, infantry coordination requirements, and urban combat protocols, all driven by fear of shoulder-fired rockets. Tank commanders, who had operated independently during the French campaign, now required constant infantry screens. Advance speeds dropped from offensive breakthrough pace to cautious crawl. Night operations, once a German specialty exploiting superior training and equipment, became impossibly dangerous. Every shadow might conceal an American soldier with a rocket launcher. The German response went beyond tactical adjustments. It represented a fundamental psychological shift. Tankers, trained as predators, had become prey. Men who had charged confidently across Poland, France, and deep into Russia now moved hesitantly through French villages, Italian valleys, German streets. Private First Class Francis Sherman Curry of Company K, 120th Infantry Regiment, 30th Infantry Division, earned the Medal of Honor for actions December 21st, 1944 at Malmedy, Belgium. When German tanks overran American positions, Curry and 5 soldiers withdrew into an abandoned factory. Finding Bazooka without ammunition, Curry ran across the street under heavy fire to secure rockets from an abandoned half-track. His Medal of Honor citation reads that he endured intense fire from enemy tanks and hostile infantrymen, then, with a companion, knocked out a tank with 1 shot. Curry later stated that by what he would call a miracle, the rocket hit the exact spot where the turret joined the chassis and disabled the vehicle. He lived until October 8, 2019, giving multiple interviews throughout his life. His account consistently emphasized not just Bazooka's destructive capability, but the psychological impact of knowing infantry possessed such weapons. First Lieutenant Waverley Wright Deacon, Ray of Company D, 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 82nd Airborne Division, led a bazooka team against German positions near the railway bridge in Normandy in June 1944. When rounds fell short, he took the bazooka himself and moved closer to get within effective range. He was struck by machine gun fire and died of his wounds. Lieutenant Colonel Vandervoort considered Ray the 82nd Airborne Division's undiscovered World War II equivalent of Sergeant Alvin York. The comparison was apartment where York had used rifle and pistol to capture 132 German soldiers in World War I, Ray had used modern technology to achieve similar tactical dominance. Albert Durago, 19 years old and member of a 90mm anti-aircraft gun crew, volunteered with Roland Seaman on December 19, 1944 near Stoumont, Belgium. When Brass sought volunteers to go after German tanks, Durago had never fired a bazooka before. In 2014 Washington Post interviews at age 89, he recalled, "I knew I was going to get it before I got down there, but God was with me." After hitting one of 4 German tanks backed by infantry, he said, "I pulled the trigger, and you never heard such racket and noise when that thing hit. I heard them hollering and screaming." These individual accounts of courage under fire represented a broader pattern. American soldiers, many with minimal combat experience, were consistently engaging German armor successfully. The weapon had democratized anti-tank warfare. Farm boys, factory workers, students all became tank killers with minimal training. This democratization represented something German military traditions struggled to comprehend. The Wehrmacht emphasized expertise, experience, and elite formations, superior individual capability multiplied by superior equipment. But the American approach reversed the formula. Adequate equipment, mass-produced, placed in hands of every soldier regardless of specialization. The bazooka proved this approach could work. That industrial democracy could defeat military aristocracy. That quantity, properly applied, could overcome quality. Wilbur Bill Brunner, serving with Army engineers, used his M9 bazooka in 1945 near Dortmund, Germany, to destroy German half-track blocking autobahn underpasses. In 2004 Oral Histories with the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress, he stated, "It must have had ammunition because it blew, I'd say, 100 feet in the air. I was glad we weren't any closer than we were." On January 4, 1945, during Operation Nordwind near Rimling, France, in Alsace, Jagdtiger No. 134 was struck in vulnerable side armor by either a bazooka or M36 tank destroyer. This caused ammunition detonation that killed the entire crew, marking the first Jagdtiger lost in combat. The Jagdtiger represented the pinnacle of German tank destroyer philosophy, 79 tons, 250 millimeters of frontal armor, practically invulnerable, 128mm main guns capable of destroying any Allied tank at extreme range. Yet, side armor measured only 80mm. One well-placed bazooka rocket through that side plate rendered the entire massive vehicle a burning tomb. This symbolized broader reality. German designers kept adding armor, making tanks heavier, slower, more complex. American infantry kept carrying the same simple tubes that could find weak spots no amount of frontal armor could protect. During the Battle of the Bulge, December 17th to 18th, 1944 at twin villages of Krinkelt-Rocherath and crossroads of Lochheimer Graben in Ardennes, bazookas accounted for knocking out over 20 German armored vehicles. While not a deciding factor in American ability to hold these key points, it demonstrated the weapon's effectiveness in desperate close combat. The German offensive through Ardennes represented the last major armored thrust on Western Front. Veteran panzer divisions, carefully husbanded fuel reserves, surprise attack through difficult terrain. Initial successes created dangerous penetration, threatening Allied supply lines and port facilities. But even during this German high water mark, bazooka teams inflicted steady losses. American infantry, often surrounded or bypassed, used bazookas to disable German vehicles blocking critical road junctions. The weapon's portability meant even isolated units retained anti-armor capability. As German offensive stalled through late December and early January, American counteroffensive benefited enormously from bazooka's effectiveness. German armor retreating through narrow roads and destroyed bridges faced constant ambush. American infantry with bazookas could block retreat routes, disable lead and rear vehicles in columns, creating traffic jams vulnerable to artillery and air attack. The psychological impact accumulated. By early 1945, with Germany facing invasion from east and west simultaneously, tank crews understood they faced not just enemy armor, but ubiquitous infantry rocket launchers. Survival odds continued deteriorating. In the Pacific Theater, Bazooka faced different challenges. Japanese tanks were lighter and more thinly armored than German vehicles, making them easier targets. But Japanese defensive tactics emphasized bunkers, caves, and fortified positions rather than mobile armored warfare. American Marines and Army troops used bazookas primarily against fortifications. The weapon proved ideal for destroying Japanese pillboxes without requiring soldiers to close to suicidal ranges. White phosphorus rockets were particularly effective against caves and bunkers, as burning phosphorus created toxic smoke, forcing defenders out into the open. On Iwo Jima and Okinawa, bazooka teams worked closely with flamethrower units. Rockets would blow open fortified positions that flamethrowers then cleared. This combined arms approach at squad level represented exactly the kind of tactical flexibility American military doctrine emphasized. However, the Pacific climate posed unique problems. Heat and humidity wreaked havoc on bazooka electrical systems in M1 and M1A1 models. Soldiers experienced frequent misfires. Rubber grips deteriorated rapidly. Metal components corroded despite protective coatings. The M9's magneto ignition proved more reliable than the earlier battery system, but problems persisted. By war's end in August 1945, American forces had accumulated vast experience with shoulder-fired rocket launchers across radically different combat environments. From June 1942 through May 1945, American industry manufactured 476,628 bazookas of all models. Production breakdown was M1 with 112,790 units produced from June 1942 to August 1943. M1A1 with 59,932 units from July to October 1943. M9 with 26,087 units from October 1943 to June 1944. M9A1 with 277,819 units from June 1944 to May 1945. And M18 with only 500 units produced from April to August 1945, of which only 350 saw combat. Rocket production was even more impressive. 15,630,000 rounds manufactured by war's end, including all types such as heat, practice, and smoke variants. This production scale dwarfed anything Germany could match while simultaneously producing tanks, aircraft, artillery, and every other weapon system. The weapon's design made it ideal for rapid training of Allied forces. Free French forces received 11,350 units, becoming the largest foreign operator. The Soviet Union received approximately 3,000 units through Lend-Lease, though they held them in low regard compared to anti-tank rifles. Brazil received approximately 2,900 units. United Kingdom 2,100 units. China has 2,000 units. Canada approximately 170 units. Czechoslovak insurgents received 162 units delivered via airlift during the Slovak national uprising in September-October 1944. As war entered the final months, a troubling reality emerged. German tanks were becoming increasingly difficult to kill with 2.36-inch bazooka. Panther's sloped armor was resistant even to side shots unless taken at optimal angles. Tiger II, introduced in late 1944, was essentially impervious to bazookas except at rear. American ordnance engineers recognized the problem. In October 1944, after examining captured German Panzerschrecks, work began on a completely redesigned weapon designated M20 Super Bazooka. The M20 featured 88.9mm, 3.5-inch caliber, matching German weapons' diameter. The launcher was constructed of two-piece aluminum alloy, measured 60 inches assembled, or approximately 33 inches disassembled, and weighed 14.3 pounds unloaded. It featured a magneto-type firing device in trigger grip and reflecting optical sight. The M28A2 rocket could penetrate 11 inches, 280 millimeters of armor, nearly double the 2.36-inch version's capability. Effective range was 150 meters against moving targets and 275 to 300 meters against stationary targets, with rate of fire of 6 rounds per minute. The M20 was designated in late 1944, with small-scale production beginning in 1948. Critically, the M20 saw no combat use in World War II. Development came too late. War in Europe ended in May 1945 before weapons could be deployed to combat units. In the Pacific, where Japanese tanks were lighter and fighting focused more on fortifications, the original 2.36-inch bazooka remained adequate through Japan's surrender in August 1945. That expertise would prove valuable sooner than anyone expected. 5 years later, on June 25, 1950, North Korean forces, equipped with approximately 150 Soviet-supplied T-34-85 tanks, poured across 38th parallel into South Korea. American forces, caught unprepared and under strength, desperately needed weapons to stop them. South Korea had 1,958 M9 A1 2.36-inch bazookas, their only anti-tank weapons in quantity. They proved critically ineffective against T-34-85's frontal armor, which measured 90 to 100 millimeters. On July 5, 1950, Task Force Smith, consisting of 406 U.S. soldiers, faced approximately 5,000 North Koreans, supported by 33 to 36 T-34-85 tanks. Armed with 6 M9A1 bazookas, they fired 22 rockets with zero effect on T-34s. The rockets literally bounced off tank armor. The task force was routed. Colonel Robert Martin of 24th Infantry Division was killed on July 8, 1950, attempting to stop T-34 with 2.36-inch bazooka. On July 8, 1950, day 13 of war, General Douglas MacArthur requested urgent shipment of M20 Super Bazooka. Rock Island Arsenal shipped the first M20s to Korea, accompanied by instructors from Fort Benning. Training manuals were hastily written in just 2 weeks. First combat use occurred at Battle of Taejon on July 20, 1950, when 24th Infantry Division received first consignment. Results were immediate and dramatic. M20 was credited with destroying 8 T-34 tanks on its first day of combat use. Major General William Dean personally used M20 against T-34s during battle, engaging T-34 from a second-story window at less than 10 yards range. He hit the turret ring, set the tank on fire, and killed the crew. Of 10 T-34s in the city that day, 6 were destroyed by M20s and 2 by artillery. Dean was later awarded the Medal of Honor, first of the Korean War, for actions including his bazooka use. He was captured after battle and held as a prisoner of war until September 1953. Over 750 M20s were produced and shipped to Korea in the first year. Improved M20A. One entered service in 1952 with improved connector latch assembly and became the main production version. Throughout the Korean War, Super Bazooka proved its worth, destroying hundreds of enemy tanks and fortifications. But even M20 was approaching obsolescence. Tank armor continued improving. Shaped charge warheads required ever larger diameters to maintain penetration capability. Reloadable bazooka requiring two-man team and multiple rockets was giving way to single-use disposable launchers. By the mid-1960s, as American forces deployed to Vietnam, the bazooka era was ending. M72 LAW light anti-armor weapons offered similar capability in a package 1/3, the weight requiring only one soldier with no reloading. Bazooka soldiered on in limited use through early years of Vietnam, particularly against fortified positions, but gradually faded from American arsenals. Yet the concept Skinner and Uhl pioneered in 1942 remains fundamental to modern infantry warfare. Every army on Earth fields shoulder-fired rocket launchers descended from Bazooka, AT-4, RPG-7, M136, Panzerfaust III, and dozens of modern weapons all trace lineage to that crude tube spotted on scrap pile. Shaped charge warheads remain the primary method for defeating tank armor at infantry ranges. Psychological impact was as important as technical specifications. Before 1942, tanks were nearly invulnerable to individual infantrymen. Bazooka changed that calculation. Suddenly, 2 men with 50 pounds of equipment could destroy 50-ton vehicles. Tank crews could no longer ignore infantry. This fundamentally altered tactical doctrine. Combined arms doctrine became absolutely essential. Tanks operating without infantry cover were suicidally vulnerable. Corporal Donald Lewis, who participated in armor penetration tests involving German Panther tank, using both German RPZB-54 Panzer Schreck and US M9 Bazooka, stated, "I was so favorably impressed by Panzer Schreck, I was ready to take after Krauts with their own weapon." He informed superiors the Panzer Schreck was far superior to American Bazooka, demonstrating that American forces recognized limitations of their weapon even as they used it effectively. German engineering had produced superior individual weapons, but America had produced adequate weapons in overwhelming numbers. That distinction mattered more than any technical specifications. When Leslie Skinner died on November 2, 1978, at age 78 in Clearwater, Florida, obituaries across America credited him with co-inventing one of World War II's most influential weapons. After the war, he was sent to the Pacific Theater in July 1945 to organize ordnance supply. In 1945, he was assigned to California Institute of Technology to establish an ordnance sub-office. He retired from the Army as colonel in 1948 with Legion of Merit, then joined Aerojet Engineering Corporation in Rancho Cordova, California. In 1950, he was recalled for the Korean War and commissioned in the U.S. Air Force, establishing a weapons test facility at Eglin Air Force Base, Florida from 1950 to 1952. After second military retirement in 1952, he worked as consultant for Oerlikon Group weapons manufacturing until 1970. He then moved to Bayou Bluffs, Florida, and took up sculpture, channeling creative energy into art. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery and received the Hickman Award from American Rocket Society. Edward Uhl lived longer, passing away on May 9, 2010 at age 92 in Oxford, Maryland from complications of stroke. After leaving the U.S. Army in 1947 as lieutenant colonel, he worked for Glenn L. Martin Company, then Martin Marietta from 1947 to 1959 on guided missile projects, eventually becoming vice president of engineering. From 1959 to 1961, he served as vice president of Ryan Aeronautical Company. In 1961, Uhl joined Fairchild Engine and Airplane Company, later Fairchild Industries, as president. He was named chairman in 1976. From 1961 to 1985, he oversaw transformation from military aircraft manufacturer to aerospace Fortune 500 company. Major programs under his leadership included Matador, Bullpup and Pershing missiles, F-105 and A-10 Thunderbolt II aircraft, and Pegasus, ATS-6 and TDRS satellites. He retired as chairman in 1985. Uhl married Maureen Barbara Kelleher in 1943 and had 4 children. In interviews during final years, he maintained that Bazooka's success came from necessity and direct problem-solving. "We really had no anti-tank weapon," he told Maryland Cracker Barrel magazine in 2007. "You can't believe how inept our military was at that point in time." That statement carried weight. The American military of 1941 was woefully unprepared for modern warfare. By 1945, it was the most powerful military force in human history. Weapons like Bazooka made that transformation possible. In 1985, at a reunion in Germany for veterans of the European campaign, a remarkable moment occurred. A former German Panther tank commander approached an American veteran who had carried Bazooka through France and Germany. Through the translator, the German said, "We feared your tube rocket more than your tanks. Your Sherman tanks we could destroy easily, but your rockets, they came from anywhere, from soldiers we could not see until too late. Many times we abandoned tanks that were not damaged just because we heard the sound of your rockets nearby." The American asked why. The German smiled sadly. "Because we knew that the next rocket might come through our vision slot or strike our engine or catch us from behind. We were always looking over our shoulders. The fear was worse than the weapon." This psychological impact, constant threat perception, was perhaps Bazooka's greatest achievement. German tank crews who had terrorized Europe suddenly became terrorized. Veterans of Poland, France, and Russia, men who had participated in greatest armored victories in military history, now spoke of fear. Constant, grinding fear of unseen infantry with shoulder-fired rockets. Bazooka's influence extended beyond the battlefield. Shaped charge warhead principle became foundational for demolition work, mining, and industrial cutting. Rocket propulsion systems developed for Bazooka informed post-war missile development. Engineers who worked on Bazooka rockets during war brought expertise to guided missile programs in the 1950s and 60s. French resistance fighters who received bazookas through Allied supply drops found them invaluable for ambushing German convoys. The weapon required minimal training for partisan forces who couldn't establish formal training programs. A single bazooka team could disable convoy lead vehicles, creating traffic jams vulnerable to small arms fire and grenades. By the 21st century, shoulder-fired rocket launchers have evolved far beyond anything Skinner and Uhl could have imagined. Modern weapons feature tandem warheads to defeat reactive armor, guidance systems for longer-range accuracy, and sophisticated electronics. M3 Carl Gustav, FGM 148 Javelin, and NLAW represent generations of improvement. Yet soldiers still call them bazookas. The term has become generic, referring to the entire category of weapons. Modern military historians studying bazookas' development often note what didn't happen. No committee review process. No multi-year development program. No extensive field trials before deployment. Just weapons that worked well enough, manufactured quickly enough, distributed widely enough to matter. Contrast with contemporary weapons development is stark. Modern systems require decades from conception to deployment, costing billions of dollars. Bazooka cost perhaps $50 to manufacture, and any infantryman could maintain it. Crews who manufactured bazookas at General Electric and other contractors were predominantly women, part of Rosie the Riveter phenomenon extending to weapons production. Workers knew their work was going directly to soldiers fighting overseas. Many had family members in uniform. Quality control took on moral dimensions. Rejection rates for defective opponents were remarkably low. Despite rushed production schedules, workers understood lives depended on their craftsmanship. That personal connection between the factory floor and front line represented democracy's strength. Bazooka gave infantry capability they didn't have before. That tool saved lives. Soldiers facing German armor no longer had to rely on desperate measures like running up to tanks with explosive charges. They could engage from relative safety with a reasonable chance of success. That shift from helplessness to capability may have been Bazooka's most important contribution. Weapon-proved innovation didn't require years of research and billions of dollars. Sometimes it required an engineer walking past a scrap pile, an open-minded supervisor, and willingness to try something unconventional. Skinner and Uhl didn't set out to revolutionize warfare. They were solving practical problems with limited resources and urgent deadlines. That their solution became one of war's most influential weapons demonstrates effective solutions don't always require complexity. Bazooka stands as testament to American innovation under pressure. The weapon wasn't elegant or sophisticated. It certainly wasn't perfect. But it worked well enough, cheaply enough, and quickly enough to help win war. Soldiers who carried bazookas into combat rarely thought about historical significance. They thought about survival, protecting fellow soldiers, and completing missions. Bazooka was simply a tool, but it was a tool that transformed them from victims of mechanized warfare into warriors who could fight back. That transformation, repeated hundreds of thousands of times across every theater of World War II, was Bazooka's real legacy. Not technical specifications or production numbers or battlefield kills, but confidence it gave to individual soldiers, knowledge that they weren't helpless, certainty that they could fight and win against even most formidable enemy weapons. For German tank crews who examined captured bazookas in Tunisia in February 1943, that future seemed distant. The simple tube looked primitive, crude engineering, nothing suggesting sophisticated threat. But within months, those same crews would be scanning every window, checking every doorway, fearing every American infantryman who might shoulder that tube. They would abandon perfectly functional tanks at the sound of incoming rockets. They would speak of fear more than glory. They had never imagined infantry power like it. And once they encountered it, they could never forget it. The simple American tube had broken not just their tanks, but their confidence. That psychological victory proved as decisive as any battlefield kill. When Edward Ewell walked past that scrap pile in 1942 and spotted a discarded steel tube, he set in motion a chain of events changing warfare forever. Prototype tested into Potomac River. Demonstration with improvised sights. Immediate production order. Combat deployment across the globe. Millions of rockets fired. Thousands of enemy vehicles destroyed. And tens of thousands of American lives were saved. All because young engineers recognized that sometimes the most direct solution is the most effective solution. That simple truth, embodied in a 5-foot steel tube, helped win the war. Thank you for reading. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.